the mental combined with the physical keeps coming up on this podcast. And I think I'm super happy about it because people like yourself who have a ton of experience training dogs understand it's not just a matter of getting them physical exercise. That's tremendously important. But if they're not solving problems and working on some drills that challenge them and just working things out in their head, they're not going to be in the same, they're not going to be as happy and they're not going to be as content to come home and lay on your couch or lay on the floor or whatever. Like they need that mental stimulation just like we do.
Yeah, I've got a funny story for you on that one. My first short hair, we lovingly referred to as Crazy Sammy. And she earned the name. Let's go with that. But we just tried to wear her out. I mean, she needed, and we stuck with the one thing, basically. We only did exercise to try and wear her out. And because that's what we saw success in the beginning. So she had the behavioral issues and she was just a puppy. I mean, she probably wasn't really that bad looking back on what she was. We just didn't know as much what we were doing. And so we tried to run her, and we would run her and run her and run her and run her and run her. And that involved like get up in the morning. I would run with her. I like to run, and she'd get 3-4 miles. Then I'd go to work. Kat, my wife, would run. She would rollerblade. And the dog would pull her on rollerblades for the same distance, usually 3-4 more miles. So we're 7 miles before breakfast. And then we'd get home and we'd take her to the dog park. And the dog park consisted of retrieving. And we would play with the Chuck It, because that was the only real off-leash place that we had living in town. So we would play with the Chuck It, and we would play basically until, I mean, she'd tip over. You know, it was just like collapse from exhaustion. All right, okay, now we can go home. And we created a monster. You know, to the point of, I think one day we started introducing treadmill work. And there was one day, I believe she ran over a marathon. She ran like 26, 27 miles on the treadmill because she was in the crate up at the front of the building and she was barking. And I was like, well, we'll just run on the treadmill a little bit. We can get some exercise. And then she ran again and then came off and started barking again. Put her back on the treadmill, run for, I don't know, a couple of hours, take her off. And then there's potty breaks in between this, but run again. And then it just ended up being, it was like, all right, just keep running, I guess. I mean, if that's what you really want to do, every time we take you off, you just bark. So she ran like 26, 27 miles in that one day. And again, it came down to we created this monster through only utilizing exercise as a way to wear her out. So,
because all you did was put her in amazing shape.
She was in amazing shape. Yes.
Well, that's I always think about this. Do you ever train any shed dogs? Have you trained any shed antler dogs?
A few, not a lot.
Yeah, I think. I think it's one of the easier things to train for because it's pretty easy to come across some sheds and work that, like set up the drills and stuff. It's a little harder to, mimic a pheasant hunt or anything like that, I think. And so it's just sort of a more attainable type of training for a lot of people. But what I see with my dog, my dog doesn't like shed hunting as much as she likes pheasant or grouse, right? It's never going to happen. But you see that like, the hunt kicks in and I can set it up in my backyard or the park or wherever. And now she has to look for something. And there's that reward of finding it in just a different way than like typical dummy work. And it's just one thing you can add in where you see like, yeah, there's a physical aspect to it. They're out running around, they're hunting, whether you're on a shed hunt or you're just running drills. But you can really kind of see that success thing click where like, oh, I found it and I'm super proud that I found it. And you can set that up over and over again. And it's something that I think that just has this little mental edge to it that's easy to come by. There's lots of ways you could train to give them some mental stimulation, but that's one of the like a more overlooked ones, I think, because people look at it and they go, well, I want to train my dog to find sheds because I want a bunch of sheds to put on my, around my fireplace or whatever. But when you watch a dog work that, it's like, oh, that's just a different problem for them to solve. That's a super easy way for you to set up and train in and give them lots of hunts. I mean, I can give my dog tons of shed hunts that aren't a big commitment, and it just gives her this opportunity to run around and solve problems. And I think there's a real benefit to that.
That's a really cool idea. It's definitely anything they're having to work for. They've got to use their brain, and that's the mental side. The more creative we can get with that, the better off our dogs will be. Now, it's funny you mentioned cockers at the beginning, because the first dog I ever taught to train to be a shed dog was a cocker. So
An English cocker, I'm guessing?
yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. English field bred cocker. His name was Trip.
And how did he do on sheds?
Really good. It was a very cool thing to see that first time when I spotted one while we were out. It wasn't a training situation. I found an actual shed and I worked him, and he ended up working in and finding, I kind of brought him in the area that I'd seen it, but
Yep.
He ended up finding it all on his own with no additional help. And that was, it was a big sense of accomplishment for, I think, both him and I.
It's cool, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
It's like, that's just a fun, it's a fun thing to watch develop. It's the same thing when your dog, the first time, I run flushers, and I will never forget, having my dog out as a 5-month-old puppy, and she flushed her first woodcock that I shot. And it was the whole thing. We had done a little bit of dove work and stuff, but to see that, the tail going and things start to click together, and all of a sudden you get that flush, and then you get the retrieve. And when that kind of thing happens, it's like, it's so special as a dog owner.
Yeah, when those lights kick on, it's pretty cool. Anything, and it always seems to happen that way. I don't feel like when you're developing a dog's natural ability, that too much of it is a conditioned process, right? So you're talking about with your bird dog, them finding and working that bird. It seems like if your dog's struggling with it, there isn't going to be a gradual, now they're a lot better at this. It seems to happen like that. It's just like they weren't doing it, now they are. And then you can improve on that and help the dog hold point better, or the dogs be able to better understand how to use their nose when they're tracking birds. It gets better with time, but it seems like there's a lot of those light switch type where they weren't doing it at all, and now it's like, there it is.
Yep. Well, and I'm curious your opinion on that in training versus hunting, because it's kind of easy to look back on the the light bulb moment with a dog hunting. Like, you remember those times. They're very, like they become very prominent in your memories. But as a trainer, you probably see that every single week with dogs on maybe like a little smaller scale, but still like the progression clicking in and going, okay, that's not a false positive. That's, this dog knows this, and it's got to be pretty cool.
It is. Yeah, it is. And it does happen all the time. Throughout that process, you'll see situations where they're not getting it, or they're kind of getting it. And then it's just like, boom, now I understand this. And they almost seem at that point to be, I don't know, it's harder to imagine that they didn't understand it once they actually get it. It's hard to see that, take that step back. But I feel like when you are working with a dog that makes that transition, it happens more when you give them a break rather than overwork them. So I think that's a big misconception, or whatever you want to call it, because we get asked all the time, how much and what are these dogs going to be doing? Are my dogs training 7 days a week? Are they training 5 days a week? Or what are they doing at your facility? Because everybody, and respectively so, wants to get the most bang for their buck and want to know what they're paying for, and completely understand that. But my answer is always, they're going to get as much as they need. And that answer is different for every dog. But I feel like I see more of those light switch type moments where they start to get stuff when we actually take a break. So we've been working on this, 2, 3, 4 sessions, and it's like, let's take a break from that and come back to it. And then it seems like they, read the book overnight or something, got caught up to where we're at, and then it just clicks. So I think that would be something the average trainer, the average guy listening to this that maybe is working with their dog, if they're struggling with something, it's like, just take a little break from it and then come back to it later and see if something can happen.
Well, that's tied into something that I've been writing about this a lot, and working with your dog enough to understand that body language and that situation where how important the pacing is. You, a guy who works with dogs all the time, probably can read a dog so much faster and go, okay, this just isn't, today it's not happening with this dog for this lesson. being able to read those situations with individual dogs is so important.
It is, and reading dogs is something that I have not been able to really teach someone how to do. I feel that it's an ability that could probably be learned. If you put, I mean, anything you put enough time, effort, and energy into, you're bound to get better. But I feel like there are people that naturally come in and get dogs, and there are people that come in that have no idea, and they can follow the steps. And you see that a lot with owners when we send dogs home. It's like, okay, this guy gets it. You can show him once, and he's like, all right, I understand. And he makes proper timing if the dog makes a mistake. And I don't think that that's we teach everybody the same way, but people learn differently, and there's all those kind of facets that mix in there. But ultimately what it comes down to is some people are good at reading dogs and some people aren't.
Well, no, 100%. Some people have a natural inclination for it and some people don't. But I think, like we know that, like that's kind of inherently obvious. But what I keep thinking about is the more time that somebody, take somebody like me who might only get my hands on 8 or 10 dogs in my entire life. The more I work with my dog through the right drills, and the more I hunt with that dog in a wide variety of, whether we're duck hunting or we're dove hunting or whatever, I learn to read that dog more, and I feel like that dog just learns to read me better. And as an example of this, I was talking to Tom Dockin the other day, and he was asking me about how my pheasant season ended up. And we hunted Minnesota, then we went down to Nebraska sometime in January, late January, to spend a few more days hunting because they stay open through that month down there. And the last day that my buddy and I hunted, we found a bunch of birds on this chunk of public land in this just awesome CRP. It was just dreamy, like late season roosters running, and you had tons of cover to work. And there were several times where my dog, she'll be 7 this spring, so she's got her down pretty good, She would get on a scent and I go, okay, she's birdie. We got to stay on her. And, those birds are running, and she would run and stop and look back at me and let me catch up and then go. And then when it got to like real hot, then she's like, just keep up, boss. And it happened multiple times. And I was telling Tom about that. And he's like, man, that's really unusual. And I'm like, well, we've done this, hundreds of times now in her life. And she just knows, like, okay, like if he sees me doing this, he's coming along for the ride. I just got to make sure he stays close enough. And it's just like one of those intangibles from just not only working together, training in the soccer fields and wherever else around my house, but just a lot of time spent together in the field where it's like, I could see my dog do that and get mad at her for getting too far ahead of me, or we can just work together and make this team thing happen. And it's like, it's a very hard thing to explain to people, but the more time you spend with a dog working in the right way, it feels like that teamwork and the reading each other on both sides just becomes so much easier to do.
Yeah, I have no arguments with that. The more time you spend with your dog, definitely the better you should understand each other. And there is something to be said about being able to read your dog in the field, and it's both directions. People say, well, they're false pointing or they're whatever. And I'm like, yeah, if you really pay attention to them, you can tell when they're locked on or they got some scent. And a younger dog needs to learn how to work that colder scent or old scent. But you can definitely tell if you're paying attention. And when I'm guiding, I run my dogs, they'll say, oh, he's on point over here. I'm like, nah, he's birdie. Pay attention. That's because she'll stop, and then you see just a little flag in or something. It's like, no. Yep. There's nothing there yet, but keep up because we're about to make something happen. That's what that means. So, yeah. But then there are other dogs that I've got that it's pretty much they don't stop unless that's something hot. So it's being able to know the dogs. It's very beneficial in the field. So.
Yeah, and somebody who knows what they're doing, they talk about that, and it's like sitting here, I'm like, well, yeah, the difference between what kind of points your dog is on, or whether it's really locked into that tripod point and there's a quail right in front of it or not. But there is a lot of subtlety to it, and it ties back to what got us here in the training. Like I talk about my dog a lot, and she's a retrieving fool. She's a lab. Her favorite thing in life besides hunting is just bringing something back to me over and over and over again. But there's days where we go out, and I can just see she's like, I don't really want to do this today. Like we'll do it for a while, but there's other times where she's like, throw that dummy into the lake. Let's work on this for an hour. And she's, if you pick up and try to leave, she's like, no, let's just keep going. But sometimes she doesn't want to. And that ties into the training aspect of just knowing, like, is your dog paying attention and is your dog ready to work, or is it distracted, or is it stressed out, or is it just tired and doesn't want it today? Like, what's going on? And the more you can just infer from how that dog acts, the more productive each of those training sessions will be.
A lot of times it can take a second person or an outside party to be able to help you realize that. And even though it's you knowing what that dog is, sometimes you still go, no, they've done better. They should be doing better. I know we can get there or whatever. And it's a huge part of the team that we've got here at the kennel, and why that's so beneficial is I'm working a dog and I'm struggling with something, and I can sit, and Kat will watch and she'll be like, hey, why don't we try this? Or it just looks like, we maybe need to take a step back with this, and vice versa. They'll be working something that's not going. And that's what we have so much as trainers, and I think this is pretty straight across the board. You got so much pride in what you're doing, and you have high expectations for the dogs that you're working, because you expect them to do this level or whatever. And if they're competing at this level, you go, what can we do to make that better? And sometimes it is just taking that step back, and being able to know that is hard. When you've got a team of people around you, it makes it a lot easier for somebody that's not hot in the moment or in that moment to say, hey, we need to take a step back here. It just looks like she's not ready today. And that's normal for people too. We have good days, bad days, off days. Sometimes you wake up in the morning and you go, can I just go back to sleep? I don't know. It just, other days you're up an hour before your alarm and you're wired and you're ready to go run a marathon, or whatever. So
that the person who's watching you train, who says, hey man, let's pump the brakes here, is that usually your wife?
Yeah, usually. Yep.
Yeah.